Reinvent yourself. Welcome to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. The opportunity to live in a permanent state of reinvention and change as change happens. A space for human potential, action, holistic high performance, ultra productivity, experimental lifestyle, unstoppable attitude, disruptive mindset, coaching and self-discipline as a lifestyle, modern stoicism, impact marketing, connected leadership, and whatever comes next.
The profound realization, thanks to the practice of Stoicism, is that acquiring the things that those in my social circle typically crave and work hard to afford will, in the long run, make zero difference in how happy I am, and will in no way contribute to my having a good life. This is a quote from our next guest, and also a powerful reminder on how we crave to afford things that it will no longer serve us once we have them. Admit it. You aren't like them. You are not even close. You might occasionally dress yourself as one of them, watch the same meaningless television shows as they do, maybe even eat the same fast food sometimes. But it seems that the more you try to fit in, the more you feel like an outsider. Come on, watching the normal people as they go about their automatic existences. For every time you say a club password like "have a nice day" and weather is helpful today, right? You yearn inside to say forbidden things like "tell me something that makes you cry," or "what do you think deja vu is for?" Face it, you even want to talk to this girl in the elevator. But what if that girl in the lift, in the elevator, and also the balding man who walks past your cubicle at work are thinking the same thing as you? Who knows what you might learn from taking a chance on a conversation with a stranger? Everyone carries a piece of the puzzle. Nobody comes into your life by mere coincidence. Sometimes we just need to trust our instincts. Find the diamond, as Socrates said. Do the unexpected. Find the others. Connected and connecting the disconnected. And for that being happening, we need to disrupt ourselves. Because once we disrupt ourselves, we can disrupt everything. So in this podcast, Disrupt Everything, today we have a new guest, a new disruptor, a person that has shaken the world in his own way. And this disruptor, as we are dissecting the 1% disruptors in the world, is William B. Irvine. Irvine?
Irvine is what I say.
Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We go for the intro, and now we go for the Disrupt Everything intro.
Take action during every day of your life. You're listening to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia.
Who is William B. Irvine? He said the easiest way for us to gain happiness is to learn how to want the things we already have. William, or Bill, is a prolific writer and a modern Stoic philosopher that lives and walks the path, as well as teaching it and writing it and thinking about it. And he has a BA in mathematics and philosophy at the University of Michigan and a master's and a PhD in philosophy at UCLA. As his academic career, he taught briefly at Cal State, also in Los Angeles at Pacific Lutheran University, and the University of Cincinnati. And since 1983, teaching at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. He was interested and still interested, or was interested in pure philosophy, that is, topics that traditionally deal with philosophy and the interests of primarily to professional philosophers. But he changed his mind and went through his doctoral dissertation was on phenomenalism, and his first publication was Russell's Constructions of Space from Perspectives. Now his research can best describe as an hybrid. William is interested in topics that lie on the border between philosophy and something else. He's a philosophy professor who not only teaches, as I said, things and writes about philosophy, who has adopted philosophy for living, commonly named as Stoicism. His books, he has written 7 books and introduction and editing of one more, Musonius Rufus. It was the introduction and editing, and his books was with 2 R's, Aha, A Slap in the Face, You, A Natural History, On Desire, and the last 2, more recently, A Guide to the Good Life, well known since 2018 or 18? Was 2018?
2008.
2008 was a worldwide phenomenon. And also now the Stoic Challenge, which is a new book from William B. Irvine. William, again, welcome to Disrupt Everything podcast series. And with this prolific career and curriculum on philosophy and also highlighting Stoicism, the first question that comes to my mind is that I think is the only one question I always ask to the guests, and the only that repeats in every podcast, in every episode, which is, if you were about to put your life in milestones, which already is in a timeline, what will be your most highlight or top milestones in your life that has brought you here?
So I would love it if people remembered me as a good husband, a good father, and a teacher. Those would be the top 3 items, because those are the things that I think I've contributed the most to the world around me, and at the same time, they've contributed the most to my own existence. So that's what I am. Those 3 things.
Once you, what moments, or what the aha moments or eureka moments did awake or made you bring closer to Stoicism?
It was a complete accident. I started out when I went to college. They didn't teach Stoicism. This would have been back in the 1970s. If you encountered Stoicism at all, and I was a philosophy major, but they didn't teach Stoicism, I encountered the Stoics in a logic class, because the Stoics were some of the greatest experts of their time in what's become known as propositional logic. And that's the logic of words like if, then, words like and or. And so amazingly, it's the kind of logic that's used in computer programming. So you could say we have a lot to thank them for, even though we may not know of their existence. So I only discovered the other side of Stoicism. This would be in the early 2000s. I was writing a book on, I was at a point in my life where I decided I wanted to become a Zen Buddhist. And so I also decided that if I wrote a book on my efforts to become a Zen Buddhist, then I could get a publication, which would help my career. So I would accomplish 2 goals at the same time, not only this personal goal, of learning more about Zen Buddhism, but a professional goal of getting a publication. It went on to become the book titled On Desire, Why We Want What We Want. And I believe there is a Spanish translation of that, but it would be old, so I'm not sure it's still in print.
We'll look for it, and if it's so, I'll put the links on the podcast show notes.
Okay. So as part of this project, I thought to be complete, I needed to introduce my readers to other philosophies of life, because Zen Buddhism is one philosophy of life. So it identifies what in life is most worth attaining. And very important, it gives you a strategy for attaining the thing in life that's most worth attaining. And for them, what's most worth attaining could be described as tranquility. But that's a dangerous word, because some people think that's a drugged out state where you don't respond to anything. Equanimity would be a better word for it, and that's this state where you're calm and cool. You don't have a lot of negative thoughts. You don't experience a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of regret, a lot of envy. You don't experience those negative emotions. You instead experience positive emotions. And these are emotions like delight, like joy, like experiencing a sense of awe, how amazing the world is. So those are positive emotions. And notice I'm not talking about pleasure. So they didn't say you should be seeking pleasure. They thought that you should be seeking this state of tranquility, the absence of negative emotions and the presence of positive emotions. So I discovered, though, and I thought, well, to be complete, I have to look at other philosophies of life. And I found out there were other philosophies that agreed with the Zen Buddhists about the ultimate goal, that is the state of tranquility. Where they disagreed was in their formula, their strategy for how to attain that goal. Now, if you're a Zen Buddhist, you're going to be doing lots of meditation. It's going to be a long-term project. You might experience your moment of enlightenment, your aha moment, the first day, or you might wait 30 years. There's no telling. With Stoicism, it provides psychological strategies for attaining, for avoiding the negative emotions and for attaining the positive emotions. So they were the greatest psychologists of their time. In fact, psychology has only caught up to their insights in the last half century. So it's been very recently that psychologists have figured out what the Stoics realized a long time ago. So I started playing with these Stoic strategies, and much to my amazement, I found it really fit me very well. They were easy to learn, and you very quickly found out whether they worked for you or not. So whereas Zen Buddhism, you're thinking in terms of decades in your practice. And I like to say, over the course of a weekend, you can get a good handle on what the basic Stoic strategies are and a good feel for whether they're going to work in your life or not. So it has a much lower price of admission, right? The entry fee for Stoicism is much lower than Zen Buddhism. Now, I'm not putting Zen Buddhism down. And in fact, I've heard from one acquaintance who happens to be a Zen master that he thinks it's entirely compatible. Stoicism is entirely compatible with Zen Buddhism. So you aren't forced to an either or choice. You can do them both, that they aren't incompatible. Another thing to realize is that Stoicism isn't a religion. So it's therefore compatible with any number of religions. And in fact, Christianity seems to have a lot in common in it, the advice it gives with Stoic advice. So I went into writing the book on desire, thinking I was going to become a Zen Buddhist. And by the time the manuscript was finished, I realized I was a Stoic. So that was my rediscovery of Stoicism.
It's funny. I'm getting started with Zen Buddhism, and when you were saying that this similarities between them, I found some of them already, and it was so synchronized. Bill, could you explain and synthesize the process you have followed to adapt Stoicism in your life? You were saying that there were teachings and some strategies that can be applied easily or from in a weekend, but I'm interested because in the process you have followed to adapt yourself, you adapt your life into a Stoic standard to make it as tranquil, equanimous. But gonna switch on the lights. Yes. Behind the curtains.
Okay. People ask me, what do I have to do to become a Stoic? And the answer is easy. You don't have to go away to a monastery. You don't have to shave your head. You don't have to give away all your money. You just need to try some strategies, some Stoic psychological strategies. There's about half of a dozen of them. They are easy to learn, easy to use. And one of them that when people ask me, what does it involve? The first one I like to suggest for them is that they try what's called negative visualization. It's kind of like a meditation, only a little bit different. But so sometimes when I get an audience, I encourage them to do the following things. I say, okay, this is your introduction to Stoicism. And I tell the audience, I want you all to close your eyes. Just close your eyes and take a deep breath. And it sounds like we're going to do a meditation, but this has a different twist to it. And then I say, okay, now just think about what that's like. And, I give them 10, 15, 20 seconds in order to really realize what it's like to live without their eyesight. And I say, okay, now I want you to imagine that when you attempt to open your eyelids again, you realize they've come glued shut. They won't open. I want you to imagine that that's going to be a permanent condition, that you will never see the outside world again. And then give them 10 or 15 seconds to contemplate that. And I say, okay, the exercise is over. Open your eyes. And they open them. And then my follow-up is, isn't that wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that you can see the world around you? Think about how much simpler that makes your existence. Think about all the beauty that's out there. Yet 2 minutes ago, before we started this exercise, you took it utterly for granted. You just assumed, well, it's just what people do. They can see things, unless they're blind, of course. They can see things. But it's absolutely breathtakingly wonderful that we can see things. So that's an example of something you got that you don't value for the simple reason that you take it for granted. It's always been there, unless you're blind, and you assume it's always going to be there. And yet it's this precious gift that you ignore. And it's only one of many gifts that you ignore. So negative visualization involves, for a moment, imagining yourself without something that you very much that plays a very important role in your life. So I gave the example of your eyesight, but you could also imagine losing your job, losing your health, losing your spouse, losing your child. These things can happen. Now, the trick is you don't fixate on that. You don't sort of spend your day going around thinking about, what if my child, what if my child got sick? But you do allow yourself to have a flickering thought about that happening. Because what it'll do is it'll reorient your mind, and suddenly you'll see the world in a different way. And if you do that with your child, the next time you see your child, you're going to have a different attitude. You're going to have a different approach. You're going to be delighted that the child is still part of your existence. Before, the child, you might have said, I'm too busy now. Go do something else. I can't really talk to you. But now you're going to approach the same child and say, hey, you want to play a game? Do you want to read a book? Do you want to do something with me? Because you will appreciate, you'll embrace the child and appreciate the child. Now, the interesting thing is the Stoics knew that would wear off. That feeling would wear off. And it would be a matter of time before you would once again be taking the child or the job or the spouse for granted. But the beautiful thing is you can just redo that negative visualization as much as you need it. So in my life, in the course of a typical day, I'll do it multiple times. And it's highly effective, changes your attitude, because, instead of you thinking, I've got to go through life getting something I don't have, working hard to get it, and then realizing, oh, a new desire has arisen. Now I've got to get something else that I don't have. That instead of going through life that way, you can simply say, you know what? I've already got a lot as it is. My problem is not that I don't have stuff. My problem is that that I don't appreciate what I already do have.
So most of the people, when they hear about negative visualization, they think they have to think about the wrong things, and they can be shaken, or they can be wrong because they are thinking about negative. But that's another kind of negative visualization. What you are proposing is just appreciate what you have, because you might don't have it in a future. You might not have it, but you have it already.
And it should not go on for any length of time. It's a few seconds when you realize this thing in my life that I take for granted is a gift, and it's a very important thing. You allow yourself to have that thought. You can fill it in, like you can imagine. Take a moment to imagine, what would it be like if my spouse suddenly said, it's over. I'm done. I'm getting out of this relation. And then you put that out of your mind, get on with life as usual. And then you realize, I really have been taking these relationships for granted. And the effort that I could invest in getting a bigger car, a faster car, a bigger house, I should be investing that time and energy in the things I've already got, in the relationships I've already got. I've already got them, and I just need to learn how to embrace them. That's a Stoic insight, a very important insight.
What are your daily most philosophical or non-philosophical, or from Stoic philosophy, from another philosophies? What are your most powerful personal hacks or practices every day?
So that's one of them, negative visualization. Another one is what I refer to as the last time meditation. It consists of realizing whatever it is you're doing, there will be a last time that you do it. And that's because you're mortal. You will someday die. And that puts the end to everything you do. Now, it's like negative visualization. You can say, well, that's a recipe for a deep depression, you're just fixating on your death and everything else. But it's paradoxical, because doing that in a measured way can actually make you much more engaged in being alive than if you don't do that. So sometimes, so I live in a place where we have a house, we have a lawn, and the lawn needs to be mowed in the summer. And I'll be out there pushing the lawnmower around on a hot summer day and think, well, this is no fun at all. But then I'll call to mind, but there is a last time I do it. If I live long enough, there will come a day when I'll think about when I was young enough and strong enough to, on a hot summer day, be pushing the lawnmower around. And it'll dawn on me. To me, at that time in my life, it'll seem like a dream. I will say, if only I could go back to that very moment. And then the realization that I'm right now living that moment. And so instead of complaining about it, I should embrace it. That's a word I like to use. And that is just say, I'm going to savor this moment. I'm going to derive as much delight from this moment as I can, knowing I'm laying the groundwork for what will someday be this fond memory. Think about your childhood, all the things you did as a kid. You have to be old enough, but once you get to a certain age, then you find yourself wishing, wouldn't it be great, to be on a high school track team again? Wouldn't that be great? But at the time you're living it, it's just, well, this is something I got to do. And but that's true of every part of your life. If you live long enough, there will be a time when you'll look back at this and say, this very moment, and say, I wish I could be doing that again. And so in my life, I have X number of podcast interviews left to give. I don't know the value of X. And you, my friend, have the same thing. You have X number of podcasts to host. And the interesting thing is, if you go into one with that in mind, it makes it a much more special occasion than if you go into it thinking, I'll be doing these forever, right? Because it isn't true that you'll be doing them forever.
It makes it unique.
Special, yes.
Special. Is there any other personal hack you want to highlight from your own experience, your personal day-to-day basis?
One other thing, and this is from Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, who I think was born and grew up spent his childhood in Spain, over the way. And he has this one that's actually kind of nice. It's called the bedtime meditation. So once you lay your head down on the pillow and you're waiting for sleep to come, one of the things you can do is review your day and give yourself a grade on how you responded to the different challenges the day presented you with, and whether you took advantage of the opportunities that the day presented you with. Did you allow somebody to make you angry? Well, why did you do that? The anger is what did you the most harm. It wasn't whatever they said or did. It's the anger that did you the harm. In fact, you're still maybe angry over that. Was there a chance you had to make a difference in somebody else's life? And did you take advantage of that? Were you ready for that when the opportunity came along? And it'll be a mixed thing, because you'll realize, there are some things I could have done better, but there were other things I actually did pretty well. And you try to learn from the things that you could have done better, so that if you're ever in that situation again, you will respond differently. So it's this bedtime meditation where you're trying to think, okay, so am I making progress toward this goal of living a life that is relatively free of negative emotions and relatively full of positive emotions.
What are the, from your experience, what are the most uncommon uncommon misconceptions about Stoicism? Because there's a gray area between, how Stoics are, it should be. A lot of people, they say they didn't have feelings, and it's not the contrary. They have feelings. They were going to the feelings and sit with them. So what have you found are the most uncommon or common misconceptions?
Yeah, Stoicism has gotten a bad name. But it's true of all of these ancient Greek philosophies. Like Epicureans, people think they're just party animals. They like to party hard, but that's far from the truth. Stoics, people think that's a person who just glumly sits there and withstands whatever adversities life can throw their way. So it's this idea of somebody who is unemotional and incapable of experiencing positive emotions, when in fact Stoicism, practiced along the lines I've been describing, is just the opposite. If you do it, you will avoid negative emotions. You aren't going to go around angry, and you're going to be a very positive human being. You're going to take delight in things that other people don't even notice. You're going to go out on a walk and you're going to notice that there's a sky and it's blue, and it didn't have to be that way, but it's blue, and an incredible color blue, whereas most people won't even, it's just, well, it's the sky, and I'm glad it's not raining. So Stoics in the ancient world actually had a reputation for being cheerful individuals, and that goes really contrary to what most people think. Most people think they're going to be glum, but in fact, just the opposite, because Stoics are finding sources of delight all over the place that most people are blind to. And so for Stoics, the world is their playground. It's the other people who aren't Stoics and who are locked into this pointless game that you mentioned, and that is, always thinking, well, right now I'm miserable, but if only I got something, I would live happily ever after. And then they get it, and then they may be okay for a little bit, but then they're right back where they were. Well, if only there was something else. So they're like a man on the desert who keeps seeing water off in the distance, and then walks 2 miles to get to the water, only to realize it was a mirage. By the time he gets there, there is no water. It was just an illusion. But look, over there, 2 miles away on the desert, there's water. And of course, what happens if you're out on the desert is ultimately you die from thirst. But there are people who are chasing mirages in the same way. They don't die of thirst, but they take the one life that they've got to live and spend it working hard to get things that don't have real and lasting value, when if only they realized how much they've already got, they could have a very fulfilling life.
I think this has been one of the most wonderful descriptions about what a real Stoic and Stoicism is. Thank you. It was very inspiring to hear it that way. And then it draws me to it opens for me at least to a question, because what you were saying, now we also talk about the Zen Buddhism, we're close to enlightenment, which is a Stoic awake, because, if you can find the light and be this light, what have you find between the commonalities or about, Zen Buddhism and what the awakening concept and enlightenment concept, and what could be a true Stoic and enlightened person?
I don't think Stoics experience a moment of enlightenment the way I've heard that Zen Buddhists do. But what Stoics discover is that their ability to see the world with fresh eyes, that ability is very much developed. So I told you about Stoics being able to find the light all over the place. The same way, Stoics' ability to find silver linings to all sorts of what seem to be just setbacks. Silver linings are almost always there if you look for them. But most people don't even bother to look for them because they think there won't be any silver linings. They go into it with a mindset that prevents them from experiencing these positive emotions that they could be experiencing. So I don't think there's one aha moment. There's just a growing tendency for you to realize, wow, I've been living in a kind of a foolish way. I keep changing my goals. So what I do today, I will undo tomorrow. And I'm not making progress towards some long-term goal. And you'll also notice that things that used to bother and worry you will diminish, and that, like I say, you'll be finding new joy in the world you find yourself living in. I don't want to oversell this, though, because I know I'm still capable of getting angry. I'm still capable of having intrusive negative thoughts. That's because I'm a human being, and that's how we're wired, right? So we have this animal living within us that our rational brain has to grapple with on a daily basis. So I don't think you ever reach a state of just perfect enlightenment that lasts forever. And the part of your practice that you're focusing your attention on is going to improve, but the parts that you turned your attention away from, there could be some slippage there.
Or just have the book here. I was thinking of the yes. For when you, from your experience and being reading a book with that concept, what is the biggest? What are the biggest takeaways or the most important lessons you extracted from reading the book A Guide to the Good Life? And what other essential lessons, if any, came later once it was published and had a great impact in the world? So, because sometimes we learn something while we are writing it, right?
Yeah. So I wrote the book simply because, well, I told you I'd written the book on desire, and that's when I had stumbled across Stoicism and experimented with it. So if you're a Stoic, one of the things that you come away with is a feeling that you have a social duty. You have a duty to be useful to your fellow human beings. And as a Stoic, in some ways, you feel sorry for them because they're still playing a game that can't be won. And that's that game of always thinking, if only I do more of whatever it is I'm doing, finally, I'll be there. I'll be happy forever. And it's a hopeless game. And Stoics know better than to play that game. So a Stoic, when a Stoic encounters another person who can be helped, then you have this social duty to help. Earlier in your remarks, you were talking about conversations with other people and about listening to other people. So one of the things I've been thinking about lately is simply talking to strangers, which is something my mother warned me not to do. Don't talk to strangers. But I find that it's a fascinating thing to do. And the world is full of people who really need somebody to talk to. And they may engage in conversation, but usually when people are involved in conversation, they aren't actually listening to what the other person has to say. They're just waiting until the other person stops talking so they can tell them the truth, right? So they can express their own views. But it's an amazing thing. If you listen to what other people say, you can play a very important role in their life. because they aren't used to that. So listening, the ratio should be something like 20% talking, 80% listening. And the 20% that you do should be asking questions that indicate an interest in the life they happen to be living, and where you're encouraging them. Feel free to share. So that's a little thing. Before I wrote Guide to the Good Life, I didn't talk to strangers. And when I did talk to other people, basically it was what I just said. It was a one-sided conversation where it was very important to me what I was saying, much less important to me what they were saying. And now I've reversed that. I found myself willing to do things that make me uncomfortable. That wasn't the case before. So I mention in the book, The Stoic Challenge. So I'm an athlete, a competitive athlete, not a very good one, but that's not the point. So I'm a rower in a single scull. So it's this ridiculously tippy little boat that goes very fast if you row it well, and it flips upside down if you don't row it well. But we will do these workouts where it's going to be a painful workout. That although you're feeling wonderful right now, in 4 minutes time, you're going to feel like you have the flu, and are very sick. And then you wait a few minutes, and then you recover, and then you do it again. It's an interesting thing, because what you do is you expand your comfort zone in life. So I know people who are uncomfortable about just about everything. Everything has to be just right in order for them to be satisfied. But if you stretch your comfort zone, then you'll be comfortable in a wide range of circumstances. And you'll also know that failure isn't such a bad thing. As long as you did your best. Most people who don't fail, the reason they don't fail is because they don't try to do hard things. So they never know what their capacity is. So a failure, you can regard it as a failure, or you can regard it as a lesson. If you failed and learned an important lesson, you came out of it a stronger, smarter person than before you failed. So I have one of my goals as a result of my interest in Stoicism is to do things in which I'm likely to fail. Because you know what, if you don't, I don't care what the world thinks. I'm interested in it as a project of personal development. Now, I'm not going to fail in a big way. I'm not going to fall off a cliff and die, because that's the end of the lesson. But to fail in manageable ways. And another way to look at it is, if you look at the world's most successful people, one of the things that makes them different is how often they have failed, because they bounce back when they fail, and they learn lessons from their failures, and they go on to make new, better failures until finally they reach what they call success. Whereas people who have accomplished very little have very little failure in their history, lots of successes, but only because they only did easy things. So, I've been remolded in various ways by the Stoic practice. I'm more forgiving of myself. So when something goes wrong, then the question for me is, did I do what I could with what I had in the circumstances in which I found myself? Did I do my best? Because if I did my best, then there's nothing to blame myself about. Because what more can you do than your best? Same is true of other people. There are people who like to be critical and look at somebody and say, well, what he did didn't work out. And that's how they judge it. I judge it along a different basis, though. Did that person work hard and do his best? And if he did, congratulations are in order, even though he fell short of what he was aiming at.
So you mentioned the Stoic challenge, and from your experience and being written that book with this concept, what's the biggest Stoic challenge of the world today, and how do you think we can overcome it?
Okay, Stoic challenge, in my sense, is simply a setback in life. There are little setbacks. You know, you look down and you see that your shoe is untied. You have to bend over and tie it. There are big setbacks, like you get a diagnosis from the doctor telling you that you're very ill. So Stoics, and in particular Seneca, took an interest in setbacks because their insight was, most of the time when you're set back, what does you the most harm is not the setback itself, but your emotional response to the setback. So that's bad news and good news. The good news is that means you can actually take steps to reduce the harm that setbacks do you by simply not allowing yourself to have the emotional response. So, you know, when you talk about the challenge faced by the world, Stoics didn't think of it in those broad terms. They thought in terms of challenges faced by individuals. And if you have a good strategy for dealing with life's challenges, you dramatically increase your chances of having a life that you will have found worth living. Then you're set back, if you merely collapse and play the role of victim, you're going to be miserable.
Could you name a strategy for be prepared for a setback?
So Stoics said that when you're set back in life, you had to do two things. First of all, you had to find a workaround. You had to find a solution, a way of overcoming the setback. And secondly, and more importantly, you had to stay calm and cool as you did so. And so they came up with strategies for how to stay calm and cool in the face of a setback. And they said it's a question of how you frame it. You know, you can take a picture, a painting, right, and put it in one frame, and it'll look ugly. Take the same painting and move it to a different frame, and it'll look beautiful. And that's true of the experiences you have in life, and it's true of the setbacks you experience. You may not get to choose whether you've been set back, but you get to pick which frame you put it into. So one frame is the comedic frame. If you take a setback and make a joke out of it, right, then it's not going to hurt you emotionally. In fact, you're going to be laughing. So a classic example of that is Socrates, the original philosopher, used to annoy some people. And he was walking down the street one day when someone came up and boxed his ears. Socrates could have been quite upset about that, could have been angry about that. But instead, he responded by telling a joke. He said, you know, it would be nice if you knew which days someone was going to be boxing your ears so you could go out wearing a helmet, right, and lessen the harm. He turned it into a joke and was therefore able to laugh at something that he could have gotten angry about. Another frame you can put it into, and this is the biggest one, is you can treat it as a kind of a challenge. And then that raises the question of who's challenging you? Well, it's these imaginary Stoic gods. So I don't believe these gods actually exist. I treat them as a useful psychological device. And you imagine that they're testing you, that's what these setbacks are. They're testing you. And then the question is, why would they do such a thing? Why not just let me live in peace? And the answer is because they want you to be strong. It's like a coach. If you have a soccer coach won't say, oh, you're feeling tired, then go sit down for a while and until you feel better, and then you can come out and play. And I know the players on the other team are so mean. If you do that with your players, they aren't going to be very good. But if you toughen them up, they're going to be great players. You're going to have a great team. And so the Stoic gods are taking that kind of approach to you as a human being. They're going to say, let's make sure he can handle life's setbacks, and let's make sure he can bounce back from them, and let's make sure he's strong in the face of them. And the best way to do that, in fact, the only way, is we're not going to pamper him. We're going to present him with setbacks he's capable of overcoming. And that way he will be strong, he'll be resilient, and he will be resourceful when he's set back in life. All of that is preparation for the ultimate setback in life, which is death itself. And again, we're back to that death theme, and I don't want to make it sound depressing, but the bad news is someday you're going to die. The good news is, with a certain amount of luck, you will be able to take what could be simply a tragic event and put a kind of positive spin on it. So Seneca did just that. He was forced to take his own life. They gave him a choice. Either we kill you or you kill you. And he said he would take his own life. That was the noble way out. And that meant that friends and family could be there with him at the end. For Seneca, this was the moment he had been preparing all of his Stoic life. And it was all a preparation for having a graceful and beautiful exit from life. So, I mean, just you read accounts of this. So the family had come to cheer him up. He was cheering them up. They were in tears. And he would say, where's your Stoicism now? Come on. And the other thing is not to be afraid of death. Now, there are different theories about what happens when you die. But if what it is you simply stop thinking, if it simply lights out, I don't find that scary. In fact, that's what I do every night. And I kind of look forward to it late in the afternoon. Now it's lights out and the lights will never go back on again. But of course, you won't realize that because there won't be somebody around saying, why are the lights still out?
It was Seneca who said that think of a life as a day. You are born in the morning when you open the eyes, and then you die every night when you close your eyes, and then you have a new life.
Yes.
So it raises a question. What are your thoughts on suicide in the Stoic way? Because most of them, and I recall Seneca saying that when life no longer serves you, is no matter it doesn't have a purpose in life, you're ready to go, and you can end your life.
Yeah. First of all, if there's anybody in your listening audience who is contemplating suicide, I strongly encourage you to get a proper medical attention. If you're deeply depressed, it isn't anything wrong with you. There's probably some kind of imbalance in your brain. So that would be the first comment. Second comment is, so in the case, you can find these cases of self-euthanasia, which is a polite way of putting it, where Stoics took their own life. They were faced with a choice of either you're going to die, and the question is, do you want to do it by your own hand, or do you want somebody else to come in and do it? And so it's a weird choice to be faced with. So you actually wouldn't regard it as suicide. It's self-execution, right? It's a required execution. Musonius Rufus, who was the fourth of the great Roman Stoics, the other three being Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. Musonius Rufus said, when you reach a point in life where it's clear that there just isn't a lot left to be gained by living, then to die by your own hand voluntarily is there's nothing wrong with that. But he also said, but if other people need you, then you have a Stoic duty to serve their needs. And it would be selfish of you to say, well, it's convenient for me to check out now. So you have to take them into account. That's that notion of a Stoic duty up to the moment of death.
What are your best recommendations or tips to weaken, or if possible, erase harmful or banal desire?
Banal what?
Desire.
Oh, so you're a human being. You're wired to have a head full of desires. We talked before about Zen, and we talked about meditation. Even if you're not a Zen practitioner, you owe it to yourself to do a 5-minute long Zazen meditation. During that, what you do is you find a quiet place. You sit in a comfortable chair, and then you close your eyes. And here's the instructions. You let your mind go blank. And it shouldn't be hard to do, right? It's easy to stop moving, right? Okay, well, not only stop moving, but let your mind go blank. And what you will find is that it's almost impossible to do. Within a matter of seconds, you'll find yourself thinking about something. And the things you think about will typically involve the past and the future. So you might be thinking about something mean somebody said to you the day before, or you might be thinking about, what are you going to have for dinner, right? Your mind just won't go quiet. And there's a reason for that. Like I say, you have an animal within you, and the animal is programmed to think about the past so you can learn from it, to think about the future so you can plan for it. And it's just part of being a human being is you're going to have to deal with that for the rest of your life. So desires, hunger is a desire. Fear is a desire to avoid something. There are sexual desires. This is part of the human experience to have those desires. And so Stoicism gives you ways to deal with them, to avoid certain of them. There's also the whole notion, the virtue of self-control. So you may not have it in your power to stop those desires from coming, but you do have it in your power to determine the extent to which you act on them. So for instance, suppose you're very used to consuming alcohol, and suppose as a result you find yourself with a strong desire for alcohol. You can't help having the desire. But, that means that you probably shouldn't go to a nearby bar for a cup of coffee because there's going to be too many other things to distract you. Yeah, right. If you're trying to lose weight, don't go to a bakery for a cup of coffee. Avoid that. So you do have control over your circumstances, over your environment, and that can be a useful tool. But there is this ongoing struggle through the rest of your life of you will experience thoughts that are intrusive. You didn't choose to have them. You will experience desires that are intrusive in the same way. Zen Buddhism attempts to deal with those. That's part of what meditation is about dealing with these intrusive thoughts. How to acknowledge their presence in your mind and then dismiss the thought. So that's one of the things that's useful for. Stoicism is just sort of saying, here's some of the setbacks you're going to experience. You just fell asleep and now you find you're awake and you have this thing that's bothering you and won't let you fall back asleep. So what are some of the things you can do to get back to sleep, to get the thought out of your mind?
Do you have, if any, favorite set of actionable and philosophical tools for a good living?
I think a very high priority on the things you do. There are so many distractions. You can watch cute kitten videos on the internet. You can gossip with friends. You can get drunk. There's so many things you can do. But you've only got one life to live. And each day, that life is one day older and one day closer to its end. So you owe it to yourself to devote quality time to exploring philosophies of life. So I don't know. So I'm not saying you have to end up with Stoicism, but you should end up with some big long-term plan about what it is you want in life, and the idea of how to get there. The beauty, the wonderful thing is you don't have to invent it yourself, because there's been a lot of really smart people who have already given it some thought and come up with the answers. But you owe it to yourself to explore what they had to say. The danger is that you live your life and then realize at the end, oh no, I was making a big mistake. I was pursuing something that didn't actually have value, or I was pursuing something that did have value, but pursuing it in a foolish manner. And so I never got it. And you don't want to go out with that thought in mind. You want to go out, saying, I chose a path through life. It's a path that made sense. And as a result, I've had a good life. Maybe not a perfect life, but who's going to have a perfect life? I've had a good life, rewarding life, a satisfying life. And so very high on list of things to do should be to explore various philosophies of living. In the book I wrote before Guide to the Good Life, that is in the book On Desire, I do explore some philosophies of living. So that's one place to get a start. And if your listeners end up not choosing Stoicism, I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that at all. That's what's working for me. I think it's such an easy thing to test, to try out, that it maybe makes sense to give it a try. But it's their life. And the worst thing is for you, and you could walk up to any number of people and say, what is your long-term goal? And they say, well, it's to be rich and famous, because it isn't worth pursuing. What I want is to be like the people I see on the internet who have the big house and everything else. The problem is many of them are not happy individuals. And there are people who are borderline impoverished who are happier. So if what you seek is happiness, then it becomes a more complex kind of pursuit.
That was my next question, is how then we find joy in the modern world?
It's a kind of thing that I don't think you can, I think happiness is the same thing. You can't aim directly at it. It's a byproduct of what you do aim at. So you find your target. You think, what's my goal? And if you say your goal is to be happy, no, I don't know if you're going to get there. Or if your goal is joy, no, I don't know if that's going to happen either. But what you're going to do is live your life in such a way, your daily life in such a way, that you'll notice that you're happy, that you'll notice that you're experiencing joy. So it's the big thing that hovers over all of the little things. So you can get there, but you get there in a strangely indirect manner. And again, there's a lot of research and a lot of writing that's been done on happiness and that's been done on joy. And remember, the Stoics weren't interested in pursuing joy. They said what you should do is try to avoid negative emotions and embrace positive emotions. And they said, do enough of that and you will experience this kind of joy. It comes as a...
They call it the Stoic joy, the one, the born inside, right?
Yeah, you feel it. You realize, I am a lucky human being. I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be living the life I'm living. I'm lucky to be surrounded by the people. And oh, look outside. Isn't that a beautiful blue sky? That's a pretty good way to go.
Almost reaching the end of the podcast. I have 2 questions and then 3 or 4 rapid fire questions. What would you highlight as the most or as the life-changing lessons from? So if you were about to name just one lesson from Rufus, from Epictetus, from Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Zeno, which one you use for each one?
Let's see. Marcus Aurelius. He said, when you get up in the morning, I'm not going to give you a perfectly accurate quote, but he said, when you get up in the morning, be prepared to deal with fools, with people who are ungrateful, with people who are dishonest. And he goes through a list. And you know what? It's true. Other people are a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing because if you don't have other people in your life, you're going to be miserable. They're a curse because they're just so difficult to get along with. And in many cases, they're simply incompetent. So you go out in the world expecting that. And then when it happens, then you say, well, it's kind of what I expected. And if it doesn't happen, you can say, wow, what a wonderful day. People were actually kind to me and were competent and everything else. Epictetus, his big thought was there are things you can control and things you can't control. And you've got to focus your attention on the things you can control, because after all, you can control them. Seneca had so much going on. He's at present my favorite Stoic philosopher. He liked to do things like, he called it practicing poverty. So he was actually the first century equivalent of a billionaire, lived a life of luxury. So he made a point of living as if he was poor. How come? It's kind of negative visualization, only he wasn't just imagining it, he was living it. Because he could, to begin with, he could realize, I'll be fine. If I lost everything, I would still be okay. And the second thing is then appreciating what he did have, appreciating it more. Musonius is the less well-known of the Stoics, but he has all of these wonderful insights. He talks about walking down the street and seeing a family together with the children taking the father by the hands and leading him through the streets, right? And he's blinking in the bright sunlight and everything else, and just saying, what a beautiful thing that is to see. And it is, but it's something we can take for granted. He was also the one when asked, what's a good place to live? And he gives it some thought, and he says, caves are pretty good. You don't have to paint them. You don't have to put a new roof on them. So just that very basic, simple approach to existence. He was also exiled. Many of the Stoics were exiled. Seneca was exiled. Epictetus was a slave, but he was exiled. And during his exile, made do. How come? Because he was the sort of person who realized, you got to make of your circumstances what you can. So you can either play the role of victim and just wallow, or you can say, look, I've got a challenge here, and I'm going to rise to this challenge.
When I started in 2020, I started an experiment that was 50 days living as a Stoic. Okay. And I practiced some of the Seneca principles on advanced suffering, on getting to a city and taking into account that you don't have the wallet and you cannot take a taxi, you are walking, okay, and going to sleep in the floor, and it was incredible how make you appreciate what you have just a comfortable bed, your bed.
Yes.
It's incredible, but you don't appreciate it because you sleep every day in the bed, right?
You've got so much. And, I'll tell that to my students, and my students will say, well, I don't even have a car. Well, but you have a cell phone, right? And look at what a miracle the cell phone is. So there are some things you don't have. And I always like to invite them to compare their life to the life of their great, 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 great grandparents who didn't even have electricity, who didn't have running water, who didn't have a flush toilet, right? Who didn't have air conditioning. And yet, you read their diaries if you have them, and they aren't sort of saying, oh, we're so miserable. We can't wait until the cell phone is invented so we can at last, live the good life, because they took what they had and they said, this is what we got. So let's see what we can make of it. And that's true of every person on the planet right now. They're in a variety of different circumstances. The key to a happy existence is making the most of what you've got.
What are your biggest influences and why?
Biggest influences, Henry David Thoreau, American philosopher. I read him in high school, and that's what got me interested in philosophy. But when I went to college, I found that they didn't consider Thoreau to be a real philosopher. So another big influence right now, I told you my favorite Stoic philosopher is Seneca. He was a very complex and interesting human being. Besides being a Stoic, he was, like I said, a billionaire. He was a playwright, and he was a counselor to an emperor. Very interesting thing. And a lot of his writings. So in the book Stoic Challenge, I quote him more than any other of the Greek Stoics. So he seemed to have a lot of insight into that. And I find myself, when faced with making a decision, and it's a really tough decision, I find myself asking, what would Seneca do under these circumstances? And it's a bit speculative, but then you realize, oh yeah, he would have worried about this and this, and here's probably what he would have ended up doing.
Where do you find modern inspiration?
Modern inspiration. I guess I look at a variety of sources. So one of the things that I do is I go out of my way when I believe something to see what people who are on the other side have to say about it. So one of the things I'm learning is how much more complicated the world is than I previously had thought. And in the process of doing that, I've encountered there are a whole bunch of people that I had ignored, and yet they have insights. And, I told you about talking to strangers. So you can be talking with somebody who somebody who drives a taxi. And the amazing thing is most people have profound insights about something in life. Now, there may be a whole bunch that they're mistaken about, but because of some life experience they've had, they can share that with you. And you can gain an important insight into life by doing that. So there are lots of places, if what you're seeking is wisdom, there's lots of places to find it. Some of those places are quite surprising. And yet it's like sources of delight. We ignore it. How come? Because we're already wise. Nobody's going to tell us what to think.
What's the book you have gifted the most?
The book that's meant the most to me?
No, you have gifted the most.
Gifted in the sense of
to other people.
Okay. So here I'm going to give you a roundabout answer. The biggest gift of a book, although it wasn't really a gift because I'm actually selling it to people, is A Guide to the Good Life, which has sold enormously well. So yes, I have profited from it, but here's the thing. I regard it as an act of teaching. So I teach in the classroom where I might have 30 students, or I can teach to the world, in which case I might have hundreds of thousands of students. And so I'm proud of that, that's an accomplishment to have reached that. And I know I get a lot of messages and emails. And so I've had an impact in a lot of lives. And so that's a very gratifying thing to do. See, that's my Stoic duty, is to make a difference, to try to make a difference in the lives of other people. So by writing that book and by writing a Stoic Challenge, I think I'm doing just that. So it's a gift that you have to pay for. I don't know. That's a bit of a contradiction, but...
Taishin Deshimaru Roshi, the Zen master, said, embrace contradictions.
Yeah.
They're all one, right?
Yeah.
What do you feel most proud of, or what you lived and accomplished in your life?
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I regard myself as a husband, as a father, and as a teacher. I've done my best to be a good husband. I've done my best to be a good father, and I've done my best to be a teacher, both in the classroom and in the writing that I do. Notice I didn't say I was perfect in any of those, but I do know I tried really hard, and that's all. And I did it in a thoughtful way, and that's all you can do.
What would be your ideal counselor team of 5 people, life or death?
Say the question again.
So
Please,
what would be your
question.
ideal team of counselors of 5 people, life or death?
What do you mean, life or death? Whose life or death?
So, sorry, I'm gonna redraw the question, which is,
okay,
you were about to create or to draw your ideal counselors team or people that you would love to have in your team, which is life or death. What would be this team made from who?
Okay, I'm still puzzled. So are we deciding whether somebody lives or dies?
No, sorry.
Okay.
That's my, if you were about to create your ideal team of counselors.
Okay.
And you were about to pick everyone from history.
Oh, I see.
You would love to have in your team.
Okay.
Sorry, I got puzzled.
Alive or dead?
I
okay,
got puzzled
gotcha.
when I was formulating the question, because I changed it from what I usually ask. So
I got you. Okay.
Trying to feel myself feel comfortable too.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess one of the things would be for a group of counselors. Of course, you want people who are thoughtful. But you know what? My first instinct is to simply pick 5 Stoics. But I think that would be a mistake, because if what you want is counselors, you want to pick people who are going to see things from different perspectives, because the truth is a complex thing. And it's hard to find one person who has who views it from different perspectives. So I would pick people who took different perspectives. So maybe one Stoic, maybe a scientist. You're gonna look at different people. Maybe a humanitarian. And here I'm not going to try to name names. One who's a great problem solver, right? So you're gonna have people seeing things from different perspectives, and hopefully in this team they won't agree. Hopefully they will disagree with each other, but do so in a civil way, and each will be curious about the views of the other, And presumably out of that interaction between them, some really great insight will arise. I guess it was Abraham Lincoln, the United States president, who for his counselors, he had a team of rivals simply because he knew he would hear things from different points of view, different sides of the debate. And I think that's the key thing.
Wonderful.
We tend not to do that. What do we get as counselors? We find people who are going to tell us what we want to hear. And that's just not very helpful. Your worst enemies can be your best friends, because if you're doing anything wrong or if you're inconsistent, they're the first to see it. And they're not afraid to share it with you either. And yet, it's easy to say, well, he's an enemy, so I don't have to listen to him. It's your friends who are the trouble, because they're going to tell you, oh, you're just perfect the way you are, even though you're not. So there's a bit of an inversion there.
It's brilliant. What would be your advice to everyone who is experiencing setback, experiencing anxiety, kind of crisis, like they're not in a good moment and they are watching because it will be in video or listening in an audio, the interview?
First of all, if you're experiencing anxiety, it could be that what you need, I do get emails from people, and I just got an email from a woman who said she was experiencing anxiety attacks. So my response to her was, Stoicism won't help. You need to see a counselor. And in particular, I recommended a person who does cognitive behavioral therapy, which is it's psychology, but it's very closely aligned with Stoicism. So I recommended that. So anxiety is one thing. And I think anxiety, again, it goes deep. It's kind of what's going on in your brain at that time. For a setback, the advice is rise to the challenge, treat it as a test from the Stoic gods. And so how do you rise to the challenge? Well, stay calm and cool, and then think very carefully about finding the best way to overcome that setback. Doesn't have to be perfect, because this is earth, not heaven. Doesn't have to be perfect. And realize that if you get to the other side of the setback and you stayed calm and it was a good way to the other side, you have a lot to be proud of. You succeeded. And as I put it in the book, The Stoic Challenge, you can shake your fist at the Stoic gods and you can tell them, you thought you were going to defeat me. Well, look at how I did. So somebody who's experienced a setback, that's the way to go. A lot of people who experience setbacks choose to play the role of victim, and they make it even worse than it is. And they just say, well, I can't help myself. Somebody has to help me. Sometimes that really is true, but in many cases, that isn't true. And by working their way through it, they can discover something new and important about themselves and what they're capable of doing.
Bill, if you were about to send a message to everyone who is listening and watching this podcast, what will be your last words or message to everyone out there?
Okay. So I don't have any tattoos. I'm from the wrong generation to do that. But if I were going to get one, it would be the following sentence. The sentence was not uttered by any Stoic philosopher that I'm aware of, except for me. And I stole it, though, from a person who lived in the early part of the 19th century. And the person in question, it's a little bit mysterious about who exactly it was. But here's the sentence. Do what you can with what you've got where you are. Do what you can with what you've got where you are. Because if you do that, you've done what you could do. And what more could anyone ask? And oh, by the way, If you do that, there's a very good chance that you're going to get out of whatever predicament you're in and go on, and you're going to go on and you're going to be a more confident person because of your ability to solve that problem.
Bill, is there where people can find you on the internet?
Yes, I'm at williambirvin.com, and it's got more of me than any single human being needs. So I've got all sorts of free stuff to read.
I can say.
There are all sorts of podcast interviews I've given. This one will be listed on it as soon as it comes out. And, just directions to go if you're interested in exploring Stoicism further.
We'll make sure all your books and also the website is in the podcast show notes. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'm done.
Thank you for being in this podcast. Thank you for helping us to reinvent ourselves this time with philosophy, Stoicism, and also kind of Zen Buddhism too. And I'd like to finish with a quote I rescued from the book, who says, "By contemplating the impermanence of everything in the world, we are forced to recognize that every time we do something could be the last time we do it. And this recognition can invest the things to do with a significance and intensity that would otherwise be absent." It was something you were referring early in the podcast.
Yes.
Thanks for helping to disrupt ourselves and disrupt everything and change things for the better, and keep creating a ruckus and keep being a ruckus maker. So thank you so much, Bill.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you. And to everyone of you out there, you can listen the podcast on Disrupt Everything podcast series on every service. Also, you can find it on YouTube, on videos, and also audios. And then you will find all the podcast show notes with Bill, with William B. Irvine, and all his quotes in the podcast. And remember that if you don't disrupt yourself, someone or something will disrupt you. And this will be more painful to see and to experience. So disrupt yourself. Disrupt everything.
Thank you for listening to the Disrupt Everything podcast series with Isra Garcia. You can listen to the podcast on any podcast platform or on isragarcia.s/podcast, where you'll find interviews with Seth Godin, Robin Sharma, Wim Hof, Kevin Kelly, Stephen Kotler, Joseph Ahram, great modern Stoics, Zen masters, Shaolin masters, Hollywood actors, New World sages, and many other disruptors, plus solo episodes with Isra. And the journey continues.